Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Flash Season 9 review series. And today I am going to be talking about Episode 6, The Good, The Bad and The Lucky, which I have just finished watching. And before I get started, a quick shout out to one of my main guys, William Linares, who I have imagined has already seen this episode by now. And if you're watching this, your thoughts are going to be pretty much the same as mine in terms of what I'm about to say about this episode. Now, normally, I always try to be as impartial as I can be. I usually try to find some good points about certain episodes. I always try and say, well, this wasn't so bad, or this was okay here. I'm going to be completely honest here. I didn't enjoy this episode at all. I didn't like it. I thought this was terrible. And to make matters worse, the Flash wasn't even in this one. We're back to this again because I remember, I think was back in season 7, Barry Allen wasn't in one episode. I think him and Iris went on holiday. We kind of went back to that sort of thing again. We recycled that same sort of story once more. Barry and Iris went on a little holiday somewhere because, as we saw at the end of the last episode, Iris announced that she was pregnant, and we kind of got back to that thing again. So Barry and Iris were not in this episode. The main focus of this episode was Chester, Allegra, and Cecile. And yeah, I'm sorry, this episode was not great. And, we're just coming off the 2-part Red Death episode, which, a lot of people said was bad. I said that 2-part episode, part 1 was pretty strong, but part 2 went completely off the cliff. Yeah, that trend kind of continued in this one. There was nothing good about this episode at all. And, this gave filler a whole new meaning. Now, me and my friend, who you know as Geeker Beyond, he always says to me that sometimes filler can be good. And I agree. Sometimes fillers can be good. This was not one of them. I'm sorry. This was not a good filler. I didn't feel anything for this. Pardon the pun. But, yeah. I didn't like this episode at all. I wouldn't say it was terrible like Legends of Tomorrow terrible. That's a whole different kind of beast in itself and a whole other conversation for another time. But this episode just didn't have anything going for it. And I can't even blame Barry Allen for this one because he wasn't in this episode. I can't even blame Iris West. She wasn't in this episode either. Just dry, lifeless, nothing to get your teeth into. There wasn't even a setup for anything big. I mean, this is supposed to be the final season of The Flash, right? Yeah. Nothing at all. I'm fingers crossed they don't drop the ball with Cobalt Blue when we get him. I don't know. I know we're supposed to be getting him in this season. I really hope they don't drop the ball also when we see the return of Stephen Amell as Green Arrow, which is going to be, I think, towards the end of Season 9. I really hope they don't drop the ball with those things. But here, they didn't just drop the ball with this episode. They burst it. I'm sorry, but I didn't like this episode at all. But anyway, enough from me. We're just going to get straight into this. But first, I'm going to give a quick recap of what's happened so far, and then we're just going to get straight into talking about Episode 6 because it's got to be done. I'm sorry. Should I skip this one? Yeah, I probably should, but that wouldn't be fair. It would just feel incomplete, so I've got to do what I've got to do. So anyway, here goes. So we saw at the end of Episode 5, Red Death was defeated. We saw the return of Batwoman, and we saw Red Death versus Batwoman go at it. And we also saw the Rogues come to the rescue, and they also helped the Flash out. And at the very end of episode 5, we saw Iris announce that she was pregnant much earlier than anticipated. And we saw the departure of Joe West, who I've always said from the very beginning, he is the Jonathan Kent of the show, and he's going to be dearly missed. But however, I hope he does come back. Fingers crossed. Maybe he might come back for the series finale. So that's how we pretty much ended episode 5. Iris announced that she was pregnant, and one little side note that I need to mention, which I don't really want to, but I'm just going to get it over with very quickly before we get started. Chester and Allegra are now a couple. Thank God for that. I'm sorry. But the two of them individually, they're okay. Together, I just don't care. I'm sorry. I just don't really care for these two characters. I really don't. Allegra, very attractive. Chester, he's cool in his own way. He's no Cisco. Let's just point that out. He is no Cisco. Two of them together, nah. Not for me. Not my cup of tea, personally. So, with that all said, let's not waste any more time. Let's get straight into it. Let's talk about episode 6, The Good, the Bad, and the Lucky. So, this episode kicks off with the return of Becky Sharp. Now, for those of you who remember, Becky Sharp was originally the unluckiest girl in the entire world, but after getting hit by the particle accelerator, she became super lucky while everyone else had bad luck. And she got retconned due to the events of Crisis, so we see the return of Becky Sharp in this episode. So Becky Sharp provides a voiceover about how lucky she is, with a little montage about how she fell in love, got engaged, and then suddenly her luck ran out, and no matter what she does, bad things just kept happening to her, like heel of her shoe getting snapped, her wedding dress getting soaked in mud due to a speeding car, and then finding her boyfriend is in a coma and she's accused of trying to kill him. Obviously she didn't. And we see she needs a good lawyer. No, it's not Matt Murdock. Sorry. Cecile. So we see in her office, Cecile is on the phone with Joe, trying to coordinate living in 2 different cities, and she promises she won't miss her train. Kramer gives her a call and asks her to meet with Becky. Meanwhile, at Star Labs, Barry and Iris are heading to Coast City for a conference and a vacation, and leave everything in the hands of Team Flash. Barry, I love you, but yeah, no comment. You shouldn't be doing this. But anyway, Allegra is having issues with her landlord and her hot water. Chester offers to come over and help. Mark wants to know when Keone is going to acknowledge her new powers and suggests that they use the time they have with Barry and Iris gone to try and find out what those powers are. Kramer thinks Becky is innocent and someone is setting her up, so Cecile meets with her, and Cecile agrees to take her case but wants to start on Monday. However, Kramer comes in and says things are a lot worse. They find the weapon and Becky's broken heels. Things have just got worse for her. Yeah, just like this episode. But anyway, Cecile, Allegra, and Becky go to her appointment to investigate. They're trying to see if they can find something the police missed. Allegra uses her powers and finds a poker chip and a retainer. The poker chip apparently belongs to her future brother-in-law, Tony. And when Tony sees the poker chip, Tony gets super nervous and claims that Dom had a gambling problem and was in a lot of debt. He gives him a lead on where the chip came from. However, while they are investigating, some goons come to kidnap Becky. Cecile's powers are largely useless in the situation. Becky ends up having to save herself by creating a distraction that lets Allegra blast them. Becky has no idea who the bad guys are. At Star Labs, Chester and Mike start testing Keone for her meta powers. Something about Keone's kiss fixed Mark, who otherwise should not have survived his injuries, though Keone doesn't think she has any powers. They try testing her for cryogenic powers, but nothing happens. Mark is visibly very upset about this. Cecile ends up missing her train out of town and gets very upset about it. Becky overhears, gets upset, and decides that all the bad luck is just her getting what she deserves. She walks away but is kidnapped by the bad guys. Both Allegra and Cecile's attempts to stop them fail spectacularly. Chester gets involved, but there's no trace of Becky. Cecile's powers still aren't working. Chester takes the device the bad guys used back to Star Labs, and we see Mark and Keown talk, and he's still convinced that Keown has some sort of frost power. She tries to tell him that frost lives inside of him, but just as she does, it starts to snow outside. Cecile and Allegra talk. Cecile has been sleeping in her office. Going home every weekend isn't enough for Cecile, but Allegra gives her a pep talk. Chester also finds something with that weird device, and it turns out it's something that essentially reverses powers with dark matter. They figure out that Becky's engagement ring is actually one of the dark matter crystals that is causing Becky's bad luck. As it turns out, Tony is the one who's in debt, so he plans to use Becky to get rich. He has her being forced to deal blackjack, her bad luck making him a winner each and every time he plays. Tony admits to Becky that he hurt Dom when Dom tried to stop him from using Becky. Allegra and Cecile go to the casino club and they are pegged almost immediately. Chester turns off the power, they spring into action. Cecile uses her telekinesis to take Becky's ring and her luck returns. Tony is taken out and the day is essentially saved. Talking to Chester and Allegra later, Cecile admits her powers were off because she was not herself because of family stuff, but once she handled it, she's back to normal. Yeah, that makes no sense whatsoever, but anyway. Everything's back to normal for Becky too. She's back to being the luckiest girl ever. Cecile also asks Allegra to move in and be her roommate. We see 1 week later, Mark seems to be handling things better, and the team has set up a baby shower for the returning Barry and Iris. Later at Star Labs, Chester has analysis about the snowstorm in Star Labs. Keown is not a meta, but more than that, she's missing 55 or 56 biometric signatures. She's neither human or a meta. And that's how we mercifully end episode 6. Overall, as I said, I didn't like this episode at all, aside from the fact that Barry wasn't even in this one, apart from a little cameo at the start and a little cameo at the end. Other than that, this episode just didn't do it for me at all. I tried to be impartial. I tried to find the good, highlight some good points. This episode had none whatsoever, but it is what it is. This will go down as not the worst episode of The Flash. I think that episode in season 7 takes the cake still, but this is certainly up there. So, yeah, I didn't like this one at all. So, nothing more I can really say, really. But all I'm going to say is I'm going to wrap this up now. Tell me, what was your thoughts on episode 6? Did you enjoy it, or didn't you enjoy it? How did you feel about Barry not being in this episode? Do you think it hurt the show a little bit? And also, what about Keown not being neither human or meta? What could she be? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Flash Season 9 review series, where I'm going to be talking about episode 7, which I'm really hoping is going to be a lot better than this one, because this one was just poor beyond words. So fingers crossed that episode 7 is going to be a lot better. So until next time, take care everybody and stay safe, and once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.